Hello, everyone. We're very privileged today to bring together a group of panellists for you who are here to discuss some common questions that parents and carers face when raising children who are blind or have low vision. First off, we're going to welcome Natalie Kane, who is a Vision Australia occupational therapist. Say hello, Natalie.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me.
And also Melissa Fanshawe, who represents parents within Vision Australia's client reference group, otherwise known as the CRG. Hi, Melissa.
Hi, hello, everyone.
And also next to me here, I've got John Clower, who works at Vision Australia as a technology specialist. Hi, John.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone.
And a very warm welcome to you all out there in Facebook land. Now, a reminder that you can join in this conversation by leaving your questions in the comments sections of the live feed, and we'll get around to answering as many questions as possible. Now, Melissa, we're going to start with you. As a parent of a child who has low vision or bilateral Peters anomaly.
That's right, Peters anomaly, yes.
Yeah. What are some of the key challenges you've faced and how would you overcome them, or how did you overcome them and maybe are still overcoming them?
Right. Well, I guess in answer to that question, I have a very pertinent poem to me, which really sums up, I guess, my life as a parent with a child with a disability. And it was written by a person called Emily Pearl Kingsley, and it's called Welcome to Holland. And what she actually says is that when you're having a child, it's like going to Italy. So you get all the guidebooks and you think about going to Italy and you're all excited because you're going to Italy and you've learnt Italian and you're looking forward to all of their cuisine and all the places to go visit. Excuse me. But then what happens is you get off the plane and they say, welcome to Holland. And you say, Holland? I wasn't expecting to go to Holland. I was hoping to go to Italy. But they say, I'm sorry, there's no mistake, you're in Holland. And so when you have a child with a disability or specifically a vision impairment, I guess it's like going on a journey and thinking that you're going to Italy, but you end up in Holland. And so along the way, there's different things that you need to know. It's a whole different language, a whole different guidebook, all these different things that you need to make understanding for your child. Lots of different meaning making and conceptual development and different things that you're going to have to teach the child that you probably didn't expect or didn't know about. However, Holland is a really very special place because it's got Rembrandts and tulips, and I've met really, really wonderful people along the way and had amazing people guiding us and helping us, particularly through our relationship with Vision Australia. We've had some of the same therapists since Ollie was born 12 years ago, which is quite special. So I think that is probably the best analogy without giving some specific examples, but very pertinent.
And don't forget the wonderful Dutch licorice you can get in Holland as well.
I know, and all those cheeses, it's just amazing.
Oh, there you go. And the bicycle culture as well. Now, Natalie, you support parents, families and young people like Melissa and Ollie. And this is an interesting, what are some of the frustrations that you experience around your work?
Okay. Thanks, Stella. So I'd actually twist them and call them not frustrations so much as motivations, what's motivating for me. And I guess my favourite part of my role is talking with children and young people and their families about what they want to do when they grow up, when they finish school, and what do they picture themselves doing in adulthood, particularly around the areas of employment and meaningful participation, and what are their thoughts and their beliefs about that. And the reason that I love doing this is because that we know that children who have full vision as young as preschool are starting to think about work just incidentally and accidentally, because they're imitating grown-ups and they're in their playtime, they're imitating jobs. So they're pretending to be working, they're taking on job roles. And that's because everywhere that they're going, they are seeing people doing work, doing jobs. So what I'm aiming to do when I'm saying to a young child or a young person or a family, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? I'm aiming to help them start thinking about work and working, and to start to imagine themselves in that role. And then we bring it back to, well, what could we be doing now that's going to help you reach that point? So I want families to have aspirations for their child around employability, and to start thinking, well, as they grow older, not what jobs do people with blindness or low vision do, but what jobs might be interesting for me to do, what interests me, what drives me, and what skills do I need to work on to get there. And I'm working with an 8-year-old at the moment and their family, and this 8-year-old is a Braille user. And every time I visit this child, there's a different career goal that we're talking about. Sometimes it's science, sometimes it's wanting to be an astronaut, sometimes it's working with animals. And at the moment, it's about computer coding and programming. And we're not making decisions now at 8 whether or not that's feasible, but we're using that to explore what skills might a person doing that job do, or what could we be doing now to help you be prepared for that. So in 10 years' time, when they're making decisions, they have the information that they need to make meaningful choices. And I guess that's what's happening with all kids. They're all going through a career exploration process through childhood and adolescence. And I don't think having blindness or low vision should be any different. So I guess that's what's motivating for me, and that's a part of the job that I love, is helping families explore those options and opportunities.
I could see you nodding your head vigorously there, Melissa.
Yes, I was nodding my head vigorously, because I think that it's just so important that we see the child first, and their skills and everything that they have, but also about that explicit teaching of what jobs are available and what things they can possibly do. So I just, I love hearing that message every time I hear it. So yes, I was very excited about what Nat was saying.
Now, John, you were born with an eye condition. Were you born blind?
Well, with definitely born low vision, legally blind by classification, and now almost totally blind.
Now, you had to navigate through life in a sighted world. What are some of the ways in which your parents and carers enabled you to succeed? So what Natalie was talking about, did that resonate with you?
It did, yes. My parents did a fantastic job with myself and my brother and sister. Melissa had mentioned the narrative about planning to go to Italy and ending up in Holland. I'm actually a twin, and my twin also has the same condition. So my parents weren't even expecting to have a second child, much less a second or third child. And so they taught us at a very early age to acknowledge the disability for what it is, but to not use it as an excuse to keep us from doing what we want to do in life. And in my role as an access technology specialist, I get to be in a very unique position where I work with families, with children, with adults, as someone who is both with them on the journey, because I'm a service provider, but also as someone who's been on that journey myself.
Now, if you've just joined us, welcome to Facebook Live. And today we're talking to Natalie Kane, who's an occupational therapist, Melissa Fanshawe, who represents parents within the Vision Australia Client Reference Group, and John Clower, who works at Vision Australia as a technology specialist. And don't forget, you can put your questions in the comments below, and we would love to see them. Now, one of the main goals of any parent would be to have their child realise their full potential. But what does that actually look like for someone who is blind and have low vision? Natalie, could we go through some of the age groups that you can help bring this to life for our audience? So from 0 to 5, which is primary school years, and you've got high school years, you've got tertiary, and then you've got employment.
Yes, sure. So there's a cluster of topics that we know is essential to address with children and young people with blindness or low vision. And they include things like independent skills, orientation and mobility, print access in braille or large print, assistive technology, social skills, career education, leisure and recreation, and self-advocacy. And just like everything else with learning, these happen along a developmental pathway. They won't just appear fully acquired and mastered as if by magic in adulthood. They need to be learned gradually and progressively over time throughout childhood and adolescence. So what you're learning in one age or stage is then forming the foundations for learning in the next age or stage. And sometimes it might not be a skill itself or a task itself. It might be the underlying gross motor or fine motor skills or conceptual awareness or spatial awareness that's helping you acquire those skills. So if we think of these are the areas of learning for a child or young person who has blindness or low vision, and then we look at, well, what are the transition points or the ages and stages that occur through childhood and adolescence. And there are different milestones and transition points the whole way along, but I guess I would think of them in some of those broader ages and stages, and some of them link into educational stages. So thinking about infancy, early learning and preschool, the first few years of school, primary school, transitioning into high school and the different parts of high school, and then getting ready to transition from high school into a out-of-school setting, whether that is a tertiary environment or it's employment or it's the community. But at each of those ages and stages, there are, just like there are with academic learning and general learning, then there would be different expectations for a child or young person of where they're at with acquiring those, I guess, vision-specific skills. So in terms of your independence, your literacy and your print access, you're using technology and touch typing and computers, moving around in your environment independently, or taking responsibility for chores at home, or going out with friends and socializing, advocating for what you do or you don't need with your vision. So you wouldn't expect an 8-year-old and an 18-year-old to have the same level of skill across all of those different areas, but you would want that 8-year-old, as they move through those developmental stages, that they are gradually acquiring those skills across those different areas at the right ages and stages. So when that 8-year-old is then 18, they have the range of skills that they need to make decisions and choices about what comes next, on par with their sighted peers. So I always think of, well, what's the end point? And then what are the steps that go beforehand to reach that point? And some of those are based around your level of education or your age, but you want it to be a progressive acquisition. It's not that suddenly on the first day of leaving school or your first day of going to university, that's when you start learning orientation and mobility skills, because there's a whole area of learning that may have been required to get to that point to know how to be mobilizing around independently. So I see it as a developmental journey across the ages.
Now, we've got a question come through. But before I ask this question, John, can you tell us a little bit about your career path?
My career path was a little unorthodox. If it isn't obvious, I have a bit of an accent. I'm originally from Dallas, Texas. My career path started out essentially working as a teacher's assistant for a school district in Fort Worth. I was looking to be an educator myself. As it turns out, that wasn't to be. So after that, I was a producer for a radio station in Denton, Texas for a couple of years doing podcasting. And from there, I ran into what is unfortunately a very widespread kind of roadblock, because a lot of employers see that someone has a vision impairment, and very quickly the discussion becomes focused on what they can't do rather than what they can do. So I found myself doing a lot of kind of part-time jobs, volunteer work. When I moved to Australia, I was originally going to pursue a career in the media. One of my university degrees is in media arts. However, I found that through my volunteer work, I ended up at Vision Australia. And so even though I didn't go into university thinking that I would be doing something with technology or as a service provider, as it turns out, fate had other plans in store for me. So the one thing I would definitely recommend for parents and for folks with vision impairments is to not be discouraged if you do begin a career path and it's not turning out the way that you think it might be, because something's always coming up around the corner. And a lot of the skills that I developed as a teaching assistant for this program, I'm now using now in my current role with Vision Australia. So everything lays that foundation for the end goal.
It's a shame about the radio, though, because I think it's the ideal place for people who are blind or have low vision. So that segues nicely into this question. There is a lot of discrimination from employers, as John just spoke about, when people who are vision impaired approach them. What are some tips for kids and or parents to self-advocate to combat this type of discrimination? Now, you talked about, John, a little bit, you know, that one way is not to be discouraged, but I think this one is more combating that.
Do you mind if I lead off on answering
Oh,
that?
absolutely.
Okay. What I found is that basically there's two tips that I would recommend. One is that when you are applying for a job, at least in my case, I'm not saying this is for everyone, but I don't disclose that I have an impairment. What I do is once they see my resume, CV, as you Australians call it, they see my skills. They don't see the disability. And then in the interview, I lead off the first question with, yes, I have an impairment, and here's how I overcome it, so that you're on the offensive from the start, and the employer isn't making those prejudgments because you don't give them that opportunity. You go on the offensive, you let them know that, yes, this is an impairment, but it's not going to be an impairment on what I can do for you or for this job.
Melissa?
Yes, I was going to add that something that we've done is Oliver loves technology, and so we're always going into places like JB Hi-Fi and looking at everything, and we just approached the people who work there and we said to them, well, Oliver approached the people who work there and said, would I be able to do some work experience here? And the man said, yes, you know more about most of these things than we all do, because they'd seen him. And I think sometimes the volunteering and creating networks of people who can actually see what you can do, what your skills are, that gives you an opportunity to be able to gain employment, but also gain the skills to be employable by, turning up on time and being well spoken, learning about what you need to talk about. So I think that has been a really great experience, just using contacts and known people that can see what you can actually do and asking them to volunteer and work with them.
Natalie, did you have anything to add to that?
I did, yes, thank you. And you touched on it just briefly there, Melissa. I think what's really important for students, young people, is when they finish school, at whatever age that is, that they already have some experiences they can share of volunteering and work experience activities. And whether that happens to be within the school itself, so have they participated in as many of the school activities, the fundraisers, whatever is happening at school, where they've had to demonstrate capacity and capability to have responsibility, to follow through with what the tasks are that they have to do, to demonstrate their teamwork skills and how they've been able to work with other people collaboratively to achieve a goal. So there's the school-based options for work experience or voluntary kind of work, but then also looking through networks and finding what might be available in your local community. And if there's not, then to start making stuff up and to have on a CV or a resume examples to prove that, yes, I may have blindness or low vision, but here are the list of skills that I have acquired by doing this experience at this location for this amount of time. And the way I look at it is that for every 18-year-old finishing school, if the only thing they've done is go to school, then that's not going to make them stand out from other young people who are of that same age. So I would like students who have blindness or low vision, when they are finishing school, that they can start listing examples. And that's the best way, I guess, of demonstrating capability and capacity to work. So if an employer is looking at resumes, they're wanting to know what are the skills that someone has, and are they going to have the teamwork and the social interaction and the responsibility in the organisation to be able to contribute to that workplace. So that's what employers want. They want employees who are going to help them save money and help them make money, basically. So how does a person demonstrate that? And that's by having practical experiences to share.
And as a parent, I think one of the big things, following on from what Nat was saying, is that we need to teach our children to be really independent, because it would be very easy to say, well, Oliver can't see that, so I won't let him empty the dishwasher. But no, he still needs to have jobs that are appropriate in the house to his age group and for the ages of my other children would do things. So that's something that we've been really keen on making sure that he has the same opportunities to be involved in the chores and the same expectations of all the other children in the house.
If you've just joined us, we are speaking today about common questions that parents and carers face when raising children who are blind or have low vision. We have Natalie Kane, who's a Vision Australia occupational therapist, Melissa Fanshawe, who represents parents within the Vision Australia Client Reference Group, and John Clower, who is sitting next to me, who works at Vision Australia as a technology specialist. Now, what you were talking about there, of course, you've got parents who are very on board with their children, which is fantastic. In the real world, we don't all live like that. And also, I've got a question here. Some young adults at school have told me that they are unable to get relevant advice from careers advisors at school. What can parents do to help if this occurs with their child? So it could be that the child, as parents, might be very proactive and have high expectations, but maybe career advisors and teachers don't have that expectations. Melissa, you are nodding your head again.
I'm sorry. I get very excited about these things. I think that sometimes if we don't have people who feel like they can give us the best advice, that we need to go somewhere else. And I think that's a time that the career advisors in the school may not have an understanding of the capabilities and the abilities of vision impaired people, because they may be looking at the vision impairment, like John was saying before, rather than the abilities that they have. So another option is, of course, to speak to somebody at Vision Australia who has a much better understanding and may have some more advice around that.
John, did any of that ring true for you? Or
I'll briefly touch on both points. Melissa mentioned responsibilities for Ollie and doing chores around the house. And it starts off very small like that, unloading the dishwasher, doing your laundry, taking out the bins, but it instills within that child a sense of independence that, yes, I have to do things a little bit differently, but that's not going to stop me from what I need to do and what I can do. The thing, kind of getting back to the careers, is that a lot of entry-level positions require you to use Microsoft Office. Just because you're vision impaired doesn't keep you from doing that. You just have to do it in a different way. And Melissa made an excellent point too, that sometimes you have to just kind of pick your battles. If you're not getting the kind of advice that you think you need to be getting, just move on to somewhere else. As someone with a vision impairment, I find myself realizing that for a lot of people, this may be the only time that they're going to have a conversation with someone directly with a vision impairment. And I almost see myself at times as kind of an ambassador for the vision impaired. And there's unfortunately a tendency for those with an impairment to become defensive or take things very personally when someone asks a question. It starts off as ignorance, but at the same time, it's also an opportunity to educate that person on, yes, this is what is keeping me from driving a car, but that's about the only thing that I can't do. Everything else, there's a different way around it, but I'm able to accomplish that task.
Now, Melissa, you did mention Vision Australia services. So now's the time to mention that we do have a range of employment services. We have Cornerstone, we have our employment services, we have mentoring programs, we have young leadership programs. What sort of information and programs are you connected with Ollie, Melissa, at Vision Australia? What have you used Vision Australia for?
Oh, we've used Vision Australia since Oliver was 9 days old, and he's had OT, physio, speech, orientation and mobility, and a lot of, I guess, assistance to us as a family to realise that independence is a really great gift that we can give him, and making sure that he is autonomous and does things for himself and can start advocating for himself. So with Oliver, he is hoping that he will be, I think the LEAP program he's old enough for next year. Do you have well, I'm sure that there's information on the website, but he's very keen to be involved in that, because like Nat's little boy that she was talking about before, that he has something different that he wants to be every week, and it is about talking to people and asking them what they do, what they need to do, what are the skills that they have. And I think that that's really important, that I'm trying to get him to be motivated to do that, because every other 12-year-old, if they find something that looks interesting to them, they can go out and ask questions. So that's what we're wanting Oliver to do. So really encouraging him to be independent. And I think that overall through the services for Vision Australia, that's what we've had, that really big message of being independent, and we're really hopeful that he will be able to find as many jobs as he needs in his career and to be as independent as possible in the community.
I've got another question here. What about when a school advisor makes an assessment that a job has inaccessible components? So, you know, it's one thing when they're when they're a child. So, for example, chemistry, and that the child is facing resistance to still pursue either that exact or a parallel career path. Maybe over to you, Natalie.
Sure, thank you. So the first question I'll be putting to a family is this of interest to the young person to be pursuing a role or occupation within the area that requires chemistry? And then I would be encouraging that person, if the answer was yes, to then be looking online and find out there are some very useful websites around that give examples of adults who have blindness or low vision performing huge varieties of different roles, including how they might do that using assistive technology or different strategies to be able to perform that particular job or role. There are some roles that no matter what we do in terms of trying to make it accessible, it might not be possible to do if you have a certain level of vision. But then if that's an area of interest, then what else might exist within that, I guess, occupational cluster that might also be of interest to you, that you could then start pursuing that. I am always a little bit hesitant if somebody says, no, you can't do that, and that's their first response. I would like to have some information as to, well, which parts of that do you think are not accessible? Can we explore what are some options for making that accessible? And then it might be, well, no, it's not. But okay, what are the other options to do? I'm not a fan of the, no, you just can't do it. I would like to explore, well, what other ways there might be around that. If it's particularly around chemistry, well, then if there are other subjects within science that are of interest, then there might be opportunities for that. So, and I guess this links a little bit back to that previous question about, well, what if the careers advisor doesn't have the information that's relevant? Then it's reaching out to the networks of people who have blindness or low vision, or other families whose children have blindness or low vision, to find out what they have done. And if you find you don't have a network, then work out what are ways to create that network. Is it linking in through the vision support service that you might be receiving within the school? Is it linking into vision agencies, so Vision Australia and your local providers there, to reach out and try and find others who might be able to give you a different perspective that's not just the, no, you can't do it.
it's really about taking matters into your own hands sometimes, or self-advocacy. A question for you, John. One of our listeners today asks, John, you mentioned that your parents raised you with some tough love. What are some of the things you addressed that were game changers for you?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Well, to sort of back up a little bit, my older sister, she's 9 years older than I am, had a pretty bad experience at a blindness-oriented camp. This was back in the early 1980s. And unfortunately, at that time, the medical staff that they had at these camps were usually those that were not practicing for a reason, whether they had a lawsuit, malpractice suit or something like that. So she was misdiagnosed and was in hospital for quite a long time after this. And so in part because of that, my brother and I were raised, we didn't actually meet someone else with a vision impairment until we were 8. And so very early on, not that our parents kept us from folks that were vision impaired, but they kind of went out of their way to instill within us the fact that this is a sighted world. And so, you know, they understood that we weren't going to be able to drive a car to go pick up something from the grocery store. But when we were old enough, they also said, well, you may not be able to do that, but you can still do this, you can still do that. And if they didn't, you know, they gave us a hard time about it. They raised us to understand what we can and can't do, and that a vision impairment is never an excuse, barring some very extreme circumstances. So they were very, very adamant that we self-advocate, that we hold our own responsibilities and do everything that we are capable of. And only at the end of the day say, oh, well, I can't do that because it's my vision impairment that's keeping me from doing that.
That's very interesting that you say that, John. Yesterday, Oliver wanted to go and have a haircut after school, and he had school photos today, so he decided he needed a schmick haircut. He has very, very low vision. He can't see more than 30 centimetres in front of him, and he decided he wanted to get a haircut. And I said, well, that's fine. You've been to the shopping centre with the haircut that has the hairdresser. You can get off the bus, cross at the lights, go into the shopping centre through the main door and walk down to the hairdressers. And he said, that's fine, I can do that. And off he went and he had his haircut and he came back home, caught the bus and he came home. Now, I won't tell you that my heart was like very, very stressed high at time that he was gone, but he does have a mobile phone and he was able to call me if there were any problems. But I think any other 12-year-old child would be able to go and have a haircut, get off the bus and go and do that. So I had to give him that same opportunity. And so that was just one example there.
I'd like to talk about that a little more, Melissa. Does that still happen now where, because those of us of a certain age do remember a huge sense of freedom and what we were and weren't allowed to do, where things seem a little tighter control of our kids. So I imagine that it would be tough for any 12-year-old and then a child who's blind or has low vision. And I'm glad you said that your heart was like you were worried about the whole time. So
yes.
How do you negotiate that?
Well, I believe that it's really key that I let him do similar things to other 12-year-old children. And other 12-year-old children can go to the shops after school. Other 12-year-old children can ride their bikes around. He rides his bike around, which is, again, a very scary thing. But the worst he can do is go into a tree or fall off, I guess. But we have safe places around in our yard where he can ride his bike. But I think setting up that is really important for future employment, because he is capable of doing something that's difficult and unknown, and he has to try that, because without trying something like that, he won't gain those skills of risk-taking and problem solving, and it's really important.
And how do you help yourself as a parent to allow him to do that?
Oh dear, I won't tell you no. As I said, my heart was just fluttering, but I think that we do have mobile phones these days. So if something had have happened to him or he had have been lost, I could have FaceTimed with him. There are a lot of strategies that he could have used to call me or to, send me a pin of where he was if he had to send me a location. There's lots of good backups, let's say, that we had plan A, B, C, D if something happened.
Melissa, it's Natalie. Can I ask you, I'm assuming that yesterday wasn't the first time that he had ever caught the bus and gone
Oh, no.
shopping centre, like you'd worked towards that?
That's right. So he does have orientation and mobility, and he does go to the shopping centre, and he catches the bus every day, but with his younger brother, but they catch the bus together. And he has had lots of opportunities to go into the shopping centre. And I remember one thing, Nat, that you've said to me before that really stood out is that sometimes it is really hard to take our children into the shopping centre because there's so much noise and so much stimulus. It can make it really hard for them, but it's something that we've always really persevered with and said, let's go. And as we're walking past the places, we'd talk about where we were and what we were doing. And now that he's becoming of the age where he needs to independently do all of those things, he's remembering where he is, where he's going, and making his own meaning as he goes through the shopping centre.
So the question here, Melissa, was, do you see your role as a parent tapering off as Ollie becomes more independent and more equipped to navigate through choices for himself?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that I could be holding his hand across the road when he's 18 because he's not going to like that very much, and it's not going to help him with his social situations. He needs to start developing his own group of friendships where he feels that he's independent and can go to the movies even though he doesn't like watching them, but he can sit there and enjoy the social experience of being at the movies. It's really important that I let him do things that are age appropriate for a 12-year-old. And even if that is, at the moment, it's the whole Instagram question. Can I go on Instagram? So we've got all of those same challenges that any other parent of a 12-year-old's going through. And it is hard for any parent of a 12-year-old. For sometimes when you have a child with a disability, there's that tendency to overprotect. And I feel that very strongly every day, but I also try and step back and say, okay, what are other children doing? Then he needs to be doing that as well.
Here's a question just come through. Now, in terms of employment, education and employment, how important is Braille? Are you a Braille user, John?
I am indeed. I would say very important. To do a bit of a backtrack, in 2016, I was shortlisted for a media position for a radio station in Dallas, doing essentially top-of-the-hour sports updates. The only way that I would have been able to do that role, and this is why I actually purchased or had the state fund a Braille note taker, is because everything, unfortunately, now is expected to be on a laptop or through speech. And if you have to be in a meeting or do something that requires you to listen, you really require something like Braille so that you can take in information while still being able to listen to what's going on in the conversation. When I conduct assessments, I don't sit there with a laptop. I have to sit there with a Braille note taker because otherwise I'm not able to be a part of the conversation because I'm hearing this synthetic voice in my ear reading back what I'm writing. Additionally, if you are constantly listening to things read back to you, what you are very quickly losing actually is literacy. How to spell words, how things are punctuated. In the short time that I went from Braille note takers to a computer and back again, I realized I was spelling the word sporadic incorrectly for 10 years and no one called me out on it because I never saw it spelled. I heard it spelled. And synthetic speech will read a D the same way it would a T. So it's just those little things. And if you're in any kind of a position, you have to represent yourself eloquently. You have to be able to communicate. And if you're writing out an email with typographical errors and punctuation in all the wrong spots, or you're writing run-on sentences, even though you may be perfectly intelligent because you've been relying so much on speech, that suffers, and it comes off even in job applications. You have to write letters of why you are suitable for that position. And if you're trying to be proactive about saying that my vision impairment isn't going to keep me from doing this job, and then you send them a letter and there's no full stops, no commas. Here is spelled H-E-R-E when it should be H-E-A-R, and there is spelled wrong. Even though rationally your employer or potential employer would understand that, they know that you still have to present yourself professionally.
We're all sitting here mentally spelling sporadic in our heads when you said that. Natalie, do you have any thoughts around Braille and what John was talking about?
I think John has just outlined it perfectly. Yes, particularly with those lived experiences examples in a workplace scenario. I mean, for me, Braille is a tool that is a lifelong tool that is going to aid literacy, aid communication, aiding in social communication and participation. I think it's a definite necessity. I do know that when I'm working with some families and they talk about, well, if we're going to be using computers and laptops and iPads and tablets and all of those sorts of things, do we still need to learn Braille? Why can't we just touch type? But that's the literacy tool. Braille is still that literacy tool that's ongoing. So yes, I would support Braille, definitely.
And it's Melissa. I was very, very keen for Oliver to learn Braille right from when he was a baby, because I had done a lot of research, and just as John had said, that spelling and punctuation were so essential for the literacy tools for the future and for the workplace. And the very, very large statistics about people who were Braille literate having jobs when they were finished schooling and education. So that was why I was doing it. One of the things I wonder about is that because Braille is actually slower for students, and therefore they might get a little bit frustrated at times. So it's just that chipping away at it and continuing to practice Braille and to be involved in everything that you're doing. I love electronic Braille devices, so everything comes on the electronic Braille. I think you said you had a Braille Note, John, or a Focus 40, whichever machine that you have, but it actually becomes that digital tool. So you're not necessarily having to have Braille printed out, but you can access anything and any computer, and even your iPhone from a Bluetooth from a Braille device. So you can have electronic Braille, which is quite cool as well.
Did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, actually, well, first I want to compliment Melissa on doing everything right. For one,
I don't think we can always say that.
Well, just to briefly brag on my own parents, just as they sort of, they wanted to have my brother and myself as prepared as we could be. At the age of 4, they had us learn to read Braille, to do touch typing, and to read print all at the same time. And obviously not every set of parents will be quite that proactive, but I found that to at least have that foundation for all three. Braille may not be as relevant in terms of if you need to read a 600-page book, okay, Braille may not be the best way to do it. Listening to it is probably better. But what I found is that a lot of low vision users of Braille and print, ironically enough, are still visual learners. So you can listen to 10 pages of a document and you may be able to retain, say, 60%. But if you're reading it in Braille, it may take you a little bit longer, but you will retain more of it because you're sort of visualizing it in your head in addition to feeling it. It's sort of difficult to explain, but I found when I was at university, if I was doing a subject that had very complex names, I couldn't just listen to it. I had to read at least a short passage in Braille to really internalize how this is spelled or how this is structured. But as Melissa mentioned, the fact is you're not stuck with this old-fashioned Perkins Brailler anymore, the way that I was when I first started school back in the late 80s. You have all of these different technologies. You have Braille displays, you have Bluetooth Braille devices, standalone Braille note takers. So you can be sitting there in the car with the little tiny Brailliant 14 or Beetle, or there's so many different companies that even manufacture this. And you can use a tiny, almost pocket-sized Braille display in the car, and then when you're at home or if you're at work, you can use a Focus 40 or a larger Braille display. So that the technology is so much more portable than it used to be, and that enables you to even go back and forth between speech and Braille without having to pick up a different device.
Now we're just about coming to the end of our session, and just some final questions. And Natalie, what is one piece of advice you would give to parents of children who are blind or have low vision?
Thanks, Stella. I'm an OT, so I love practical things and I like things that are readily available. So what's around natural learning environments that you can take advantage of? And Melissa, you mentioned that we've had chats about the shopping centre. To me, I think that is the most amazing source of learning for a child with blindness or low vision. So I often encourage the families that I work with, regardless of whatever age that the child or young person is, to choose the biggest local shopping centre you can find, to sit down for a while and have a conversation about all of the different jobs that parents can observe people performing as they're walking through or they're working in the shopping centre. And just describing what's going on. So that can be based on what people are wearing, what people are carrying, what they're transporting around, the different shops, the different services, the financial institutions, the food places, the supermarkets, all of those different jobs that are happening in a shopping centre, but those are bits of visual information that a child with full vision starts learning about very early on, from the first time they start visiting places like that. And so they're starting to learn what people's jobs are. So we want kids with blindness or low vision to have those same opportunities to learn about job roles. And it becomes particularly important, I think, John, you mentioned it earlier, about when kids when they reach teenage years, entry-level jobs. A lot of entry-level jobs are within shopping centres. So in order for you to apply for a job, you need to know what jobs exist. To have choice, you need to know what's around. So I think finding natural learning environments and using what you can from that environment to explain what's going on is a good tool, because that can lead into, well, what are the skills that you need? What are the areas of learning that you need? What can we do now to help you prepare for something in the future? So that would be my piece of advice. Thank you.
Now, Melissa, you may have answered this question very early on with your, you think you're going to Italy, but you wind up in Holland or the Netherlands. What is a mantra that you live by?
Yes, well, I guess that could be the mantra, that Holland is a beautiful place. But I think that really independence is the key, because children aren't going to be your children forever as much as we want them to be, and they're going to be their own young person and adult. So I need to be able to give all of my children independence so that they can go out into the world and have their own jobs and have their own friends and have their own community and feel a sense of belonging.
And John, what is something you would recommend every person who is blind or has low vision to ensure that they are on the pathway to success?
I would say, I guess it's kind of a two-part summary. It's okay to be frustrated. Don't feel like you have to get this right the first time, because that's how we grow. Not just as individuals with a vision impairment, but everyone else. There's always a task that seems insurmountable, but if you break it down to the basic steps, first I do this, then I do that, and really break it down and practice it over and over again, you'll get there. If I can close with a quick anecdote, when I first moved here, I live about 2 blocks away from a really busy intersection. And I was petrified to cross that intersection, because in Australia, you have turn lanes, you have things that are at 45-degree angles and 90-degree angles. So it was crossing basically a 6-lane highway. But what I found I had to do is I broke it down to every possible step, every possible mistake that I could make. And in crossing it over the course of about a month, I made every mistake that I could make. But that also meant that when I finally got across that highway, I realized that wasn't so tough. And it's about just being realistic, but also really putting your mind to it, because there's almost nothing that we can't accomplish, even if we do have an impairment.
Thanks, John. So as a parent or a carer of someone who is blind or have low vision, you might be facing obstacles and frustrations, but Vision Australia is here to help with a range of services. So you can give us a call on 1300 8474 466. That's 1300 8474 466, or go to our website to see all of our mentoring services and employment services, and also youth leadership programs that we're running. And you can find us at visionaustralia.org. And I have been speaking with Natalie Kane, who's an OT, occupational therapist here at Vision Australia. Thank you so much for your time today, Natalie.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for such wonderful questions as well.
And also to Melissa Fanshawe, who represents parents on our client reference group. Thanks for your time today, Melissa.
My pleasure. And my details are also on Vision Australia website. So if there are any parents who do need to chat about what they're going through, I'm always very happy to.
That's very generous of you, Melissa. And also we've been speaking with John Clower, who works at Vision Australia as a technology specialist. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much. That was my pleasure.
And I'm Stella Glory, and thank you all very much for watching today and for your questions.
Vision Australia.
Blindness,
low vision,
Opportunity.